They say you can't choose your family, but in my case, my family chose to delete me. My name is Julianne. I'm 32, and 3 hours ago I was standing on the stage of the Fairmont Copley Plaza in Boston. It was the Founders Gala for my father's biotech empire. My father, Dr. Silas Thorne, stood at the podium and announced that he was handing over his $400 million research legacy to my younger brother, Leo, a man who hasn't stepped foot in a lab since high school. The room erupted in applause. My stepmother, Claire, looked at me from the front row with a smirk that could freeze the Charles River. She leaned over to the donor next to her and whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch poor Julianne. She has the work ethic of a lab rat, but none of the Thorne blood. It's a shame she's just an assistant, the crowd chuckled. I stood there, the woman who had actually authored the 3 patents, making them billionaires, and realized they hadn't just bypassed me for the promotion. They were setting the stage to disinherit me entirely by claiming I wasn't genetically fit to lead. But Claire made one massive mistake. She forgot that before I was an assistant, I was a forensic geneticist. And while she was busy spending my father's money on gala dresses, I was the one running the biometric security for the company's private health screenings. 2 nights ago, I pulled the Thorne family DNA baseline for a routine insurance update. I wasn't looking for a scandal, I was looking for a marker from my father's heart condition. What I found instead made the floor beneath the lab feel like it was disintegrating. Leo, the golden heir, didn't match my father's DNA, not even close. But he matched someone else. Someone who had been my father's loyal CFO and Claire's best friend for 20 years. I stood on that stage listening to Silas talk about Thorne blood while I held the proof in my clutch bag that his entire legacy was built on a 20-year-old lie. Stay with me, because in a moment you're going to see what happens when the unfit daughter decides to perform a public DNA test on a $400 million empire. The celebration is about to become a crime scene. I didn't scream on that stage. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled, clapped for Leo, and watched him stumble through a speech he'd clearly spent all day rehearsing in a mirror. He looked so much like our father from a distance, the same posture, the same expensive suit. But under a microscope, he was a stranger. My stepmother Claire was glowing beside him, her hand resting on the shoulder of the CFO Marcus. They looked like the perfect board of directors. In reality, they were a coup in progress. I went back to the lab at Mass General that night. The legacy transition was set for Monday morning at the courthouse, where the Thorne Trust would officially be handed to Leo. I wasn't invited. But Claire had forgotten one thing: she had used the company's VIP health concierge service for her Botox and vitamin drips for years. I pulled the logs from her last visit. She hadn't just been getting vitamins, she had been paying the clinic to suppress a series of private paternity tests from 5 years ago. Tests that Silas, my father, had requested when he first got sick. Tests that Marcus, the CFO, had intercepted and deleted before they ever reached my father's desk. It wasn't just an affair. It was a long-term medical gaslight. My father had been living in a house of mirrors for 2 decades, thinking he was protecting his son while the 2 people he trusted most were just waiting for his heart to fail so they could liquidate the Thorne patents and vanish. And me? I was the assistant they kept around to do the actual science while they prepared to declare unstable once the money cleared. They had already drafted a medical guardianship form in my name. They were going to use my father's own hospital to lock me away. Saturday morning, I walked into my father's recovery suite. He was hooked up to a cardiac monitor, looking tired, looking like a man who had built a kingdom but lost his soul. Claire was there, of course, fluffing his pillows for the cameras. Julianne, she snapped. I told you he needs rest. The gala was enough of a strain on him. Go back to your spreadsheets. I didn't leave. I walked to the monitor and turned the volume up. The steady beep, beep, beep of his heart filled the room. I'm not here for spreadsheets, Claire, I said, pulling a cold, laminated folder from my bag. I'm here to talk about the genetic anomaly in the Thorne Trust. Dad, did you know that Marcus and Claire have been filtering your lab results for 5 years? Because according to the raw data I just pulled from the mainframe, Leo isn't the one who's going to save this company. He's the one who's going to trigger the fraud clause in your will. Claire's face went from loving wife to predator in a heartbeat. She grabbed the folder, her hand shaking so hard she ripped the first page. Stay with me because in the next 60 seconds you're going to see what happens when a geneticist decides to play God with her father's life. The family secret isn't just a scandal, it's a $400 million explosion that's about to hit the Boston courthouse. The Suffolk County probate court doesn't care about your gala dresses or your $400 million ego. It smells like old paper floor wax and the truth. Monday morning at 9 a.m. the succession hearing began. My father, Silas, was brought in via wheelchair, his face gray and his breathing shallow. Claire stood behind him like a guardian angel, her hand resting on his shoulder, while Marcus, the loyal CFO, sat at the counsel table looking like a man who already owned the room. They thought I was still in the lab crying over my disinheritance. They didn't realize I was already in the judge's chambers an hour before they arrived. The judge looked at the trust transfer documents. He looked at Leo, who was sitting in the front row, adjusting a tie that cost more than my first car. Before we finalize the Thorne Trust, the judge said, his voice echoing in the marble room, "We have a supplemental filing from Dr. Julianne Thorne regarding the biological succession clause." Claire laughed, a sharp, nervous sound that cut through the silence. "Your Honor, Julianne is a disgruntled employee. She's mentally unstable. We have medical papers being drafted as we speak to prove she's unfit to even be here." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood up from the back row, holding a tablet synced to the courtroom's projection screen. "Your Honor," I said, "I'm not here to talk about my mental health. I'm here to talk about the paternity fraud that's been fueling this company's succession for 20 years. If Leo is a Thorne, then I'm a ghost. But I'm not a ghost. I'm the only person in this room who actually shares Silas's DNA." I hit the button. The screen didn't show a legal brief. It showed a split-screen genetic map, Leo's markers on the left, Marcus's markers on the right. They were an identical 99.9% match. The room went so quiet you could hear the cardiac monitor on my father's wrist start to spike. Beep, beep. Silas turned his head slowly, looking from Claire to Marcus, then back to the son he'd spent 20 years grooming. "Silas, it's a lie!" Claire screamed, her voice cracking. "She's hacked the system. She's a scientist, she fabricated the results." But then the judge looked at the second file. I'd submitted the hospital admin logs, the ones showing Marcus's private login being used at midnight to delete my father's original paternity requests from 5 years ago. Silas didn't scream. He didn't even look at Claire. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life I saw him see me. "Julianne," he whispered, his voice vibrating with a decade of wasted pride. "Is that why you were paying the malpractice insurance? Because you knew?" I looked him in the eye and said the only thing that mattered. "I didn't do it because I wanted the money, Dad. I did it because I was the only one in that house who actually had Thorne blood in my veins." "You didn't raise a son. You raised a coup. The succession didn't happen. The Thorne Trust didn't go to Leo. It was frozen by federal order within 30 minutes. Marcus and Claire didn't walk out of that courtroom into a limo. They walked out in handcuffs for corporate fraud and medical gaslighting. Turns out when you use a company's medical concierge to hide a 20-year-old affair, it's not just a secret, it's a felony. Leo, he wasn't even a Thorne anymore. He was just a guy with an expensive suit and no last name. I'm 32. I'm not an assistant anymore. I'm the CEO of Thorne Biotech. My father is recovering not just from his heart condition, but from the 20-year lie he lived in. We don't talk about the legacy anymore. We talk about the science. I sold the Fairmont Copley Gala Hall and turned it into a scholarship for daughters who were told they weren't fit to lead. Because in the end, blood isn't just what makes you family. It's the truth that sets you free. They tried to delete me from the family tree, so I just rebuilt the forest. Never let someone tell you that your hard work is a sign of unstable character. It's usually just a sign that you're the only one in the room who knows the real score. I'm Julianne, and this was my favorite experiment yet. If you think Claire and Marcus got exactly what they deserved, type genetic below. I'll see you in the next one.